Okay, so it's 12, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the video. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Give me a little shout in the chat, a little thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Looks like we have Senegal, Latvia,
Brazil.
Oh, yeah, Brazil, Houston. Sweet, loud and clear. Okay, I'm super excited to be doing this again. Last time I had a lot of fun, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff. Looks like we got some people from Toronto, from the Bay Area. I see Jake Marsh in there. Hey, Jake. Cool. You know what's weird? YouTube's emoji.
Oh yeah, they
really
are
weird.
very weird.
Yeah. Anyway. Hello from Chicago. More Brazil. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started because we have a lot of stuff we could potentially get to, and we're just going to get as far as we can. First off, I want to talk about, just to catch everybody up that wasn't here last time. Let me run this. This app we're building is just a Mac app for dealing with transcriptions of videos using rev.com as a service to do it. They provide an API and you can submit videos to their service. And then sometime later, it usually takes a few hours, sometimes a day, to turn around and they'll come back with the transcriptions. And so this is what we built last time. It talks to their Sandbox API and renders the test orders in their Sandbox environment. And this is about as far as we got. We also did the preferences screen, and we sort of cheated here in storing these credentials in user defaults. And we said this all along that this isn't where you should do it. And so people were like, okay, how should you do it? So I want to tackle that first. But first, I want to welcome back to the stream Guy Rambo from Brazil. Thank you for joining me again.
Hey, thanks for having me again, and hope we can get this app evolved today.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first, I want to take these out of user defaults and put them in the KeyChain where they belong. And so we can no longer like quickly bind these values straight from storyboards. We've got to bring in some code. And to do that, I'm going to create a group for preferences. And then inside of there, I want to have a preferences view controller.
Yeah, so we didn't even have a specific subclass for that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Preferences view controller is an NS view controller. And then we'll go to our storyboard to the preferences, not the window, but the view controller, and change the identity here to preferences view controller. Okay. Also, just for the stream, I increased the resolution, or rather decreased the resolution to make everything a little bit bigger. Hope that that's a little bit more readable. Okay, so we have our thing wired up now. I still want to use bindings for this, but I need to bind to something else. And that something else is going to be a model object that is bindable. And it's going to be somewhat boring to write, so I'm just going to drag in one I've already written. And
here's one we prepared earlier.
Yeah. Here is our ready-baked turkey.
So for people who are tuning in today, just a quick recap on bindings. So bindings are this technology where you can hook up your UI directly to underlying model objects on macOS. It's not available on iOS. So you just hooked up the text fields to the corresponding user defaults keys, and that can be done directly. And that's why we didn't even have a subclass of an NSView controller for this screen. But since now we are going to use the KeyChain and can't hook up directly using the storyboard, we had to create our own subclass of view controller and create our own model object that we are going to then bind to the text fields.
Yeah, so you can see here that I pulled in a CocoaPod called SAM KeyChain, and this is a really pretty lightweight wrapper around the KeyChain API, which is a little obtuse to work with, but with a wrapper, you can basically use it as a key value store. And so I brought that in already, and our preferences model object is an NS object. It uses this special attribute here that says that all of its properties are going to have that Objective-C tag. And so we can bind to all the properties in this object.
Yeah, bindings, they use KVO, so all properties that can be bound to interface elements have to be at Objective-C and they have to be dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And after I said that, I realized that I manually typed it anyway.
That's redundant.
Yeah. So so basically I have a bunch of properties here. We've got the sandbox and production. Sorry, those are the keys. We've got the environment, which is a string. It's either sandbox or production. We've got the sandbox user key and sandbox client key, the production user key, production client key. So the environment is something that is appropriate to go in user defaults. So here I'm using the user defaults and setting it for a static key. And I do this because I don't want to have to type the same string everywhere. And then when we change it, I have my own notification that's saying that the preference has changed, so that the that main order list view controller can just listen for one notification and reload its UI. Cool. For the others that are considered credentials, we're going to use the same sort of pattern of a dynamic property, but we're going to use SAM KeyChain. And the way this works is you have a password for service and account. And so the way I'm looking at this is that the service is either going to be sandbox or production Rev API. The account is going to be the user key, and the password is going to be the value underneath this key. So when you set a new value, it's going to go through the setter here, and we'll set the password with that value for this service for this account. And then when that's all done, we notify changed. The way since this is an optional thing, we could set a nil value on this. And so in that case, I'm calling delete password for service. Okay. So with this in mind, we would like to have a reference to that here. So I'm going to create an Objective-C dynamic var preferences. And then
Jake is asking why they have to be dynamic, or suggesting that we describe the purpose for using dynamic here. And basically we need dynamic because we need these properties to be key value observable, which is this very old API that's still in use, and it's very cool, where you can observe properties directly without having to create your own callbacks or something.
So it's kind of like this, where you say in the set, you could say something like will change value for key foo, right? And this stuff gets synthesized for you automatically, right?
Yeah. And that's a NS object thing. So that's why we have to add dynamic. And this binding thing from storyboards that we're using to bind directly to interface elements, it uses KVO, so that's why we need the dynamic thing here.
Okay, so now we've got a property on our view controller called preferences, and preferences also has bindable things. So we have like a pathway to some bindable values on this object, otherwise known as a key path.
And our view controller is going to be just that, right?
Our view there's really no code required because we're going to do everything else in bindings.
Just need the property there.
On the text field, where we were binding to the user defaults controller, I'm going to change this and bind to the... What is this? Preferences. Is that the name of the controller?
That's a great question.
That's the name of the controller, I believe, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. It's a little bit confusing because I called that preferences also, but this view controller is called preferences view controller, so it's just pulling out that string. That's pretty confusing. Okay. So anyway, back on this text field here for sandbox user key, we're going to bind to our controller instead of the user defaults. And then for the model key path, we're going to reach into the preferences property and then get the sandbox user key. Then we'll do the same thing for sandbox client key. We're going to bind to our controller self.preferences.sandbox client key.
So this is known as two-way data binding on other platforms. I think web stuff uses this kind of terminology. So it means basically that the interface element it's directly connected to the model and vice versa. So whenever one changes, the other is going to change as well.
All right, so here we'll have preferences.production user key and then production client key.
And this is the perfect use case for bindings. We mentioned on the last episode that bindings are really good for preferences, and whenever you have bindings between simple model objects and screen elements. And can you explain what that dialog means?
Yeah, hang on. I just need to pull it off to the side because I need to type in my password. Okay, so because we are using the... Oops. I can't type my password and talk at the same time. Okay, because we are using the keychain, it's a sensitive thing, and so you need your password to be able to access the keychain on that device. So the annoying part about this is that if your app is not signed, if you go over to our thing here, I have signed here. I believe this is true. I may be wrong on this, but anyway, if your app is not signed, it's going to prompt you every time.
Actually, I think even if your app is signed, it's going to keep prompting you if the code changes, because the signature for the app has changed, so it's not trusted anymore. So it has to authenticate again. I think that's what happens, because I remember running into this problem even with signed apps.
Yeah, it is super duper annoying.
Yeah, you could probably if def debug and save to
set
defaults
it to
when
some
debug.
That's probably a good idea. Anyway, so I have already set up some stuff in the keychain, so it already had values. But if you were doing this and following along, you would have to retype your user key and client key because where those came from has changed. Another thing worth noting is that these bindings are when the text box leaves focus. So I've run into a couple of cases where, like, if you had like an OK button that dismisses the screen, and you wanted to maybe disable the button if nobody's typed in anything here, that can be a little bit tricky.
You can configure that, actually. Do you want to head back into Interface Builder?
Yeah. So after reading about it, I started to realize that there are some... it's a little bit tricky. It's not just a clear answer here. So there's two things that I found, and maybe you can shed some light on this. One of them is these control states can be continuous, and I'm not sure if this has any effect on NSTextField or not.
Yes, I believe it does. If you set it to continuous, as you type, it's going to fire up its action, basically.
Okay,
I'm not
so
sure.
There's another one here, which is continuously updates value. So there's two different checkboxes. If you set continuously updates value, then your binding will get triggered every time they type. However, this can be problematic if you want to support undo, because at that point, undo is no longer the change you made, it's every character you type. So I think you just have to be careful about that. And maybe a better way of doing this would be to handle the text field did change notification and read the value there rather than update the binding every time.
Yeah, and if you have a button, you can make sure you save the values when the button is clicked. Or if you if you're in a window, you make sure that when the window gets closed, you update the values to make sure you don't lose anything.
Right. Okay, so with that in mind, that sort of handles preferences. We also got some really good feedback about our view controller here, that our table view implementation, if you recall, providing the values for each one of these rows was done manually in this view table column row. I don't even know how to say this. Table view for a row, which returns a view. And in this case, we were making the cell view here, then grabbing its text field and stuffing a value into it. And we also had this issue here where we were using our own formatter to format the price. And so we got some feedback that this is, it's good for us to know that this exists, so you have ultimate control, but there's definitely a better way to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, this is something you'd use if you wanted to make a more custom cell, let's say, but since we're using just the basic text cell, we can do it better.
So I'm going to create a new object here called order table row. And this is going to be sort of a view model. It's going to be a model that's very specific just to be bound to the view. And so, in fact, I can probably just paste this in because it's not that interesting. So what we're going to do here is declare an NS object. This needs to import revkit so that we have access to the order. And it just has properties for each one of its things. Each one of the things that we're going to bind to in the table. And the one interesting thing to call out here is that, and I think this is just a good thing in general, even on iOS, to do things like this where you essentially like flatten or dumb down your model objects so that they're easier to consume in the view. And in this case, formatting the price was something that it didn't want to work with an NS decimal, or rather decimal. It wanted to work with NS number. Or sorry, it wanted to work with doubles. And so we needed to do this translation step anyway, somehow. And this is like a good place to do that. So it sort of flattens the object down into a type that is easier to work with.
Yeah, you're basically adapting your underlying model to a model that's more suitable for displaying.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing to call out is that we're using this Objective-C members attribute so that we don't have to type it on every single property like I did before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now that we have this order table row, now when we go back to our view controller here, instead of implementing this method, we're going to have this func table view, and there's a, what is it called? Object value for table column. So you can still provide different values for a table column, but the point is here is that, so this is going to be called for every row and column, but we're going to check to see if the row is valid, right? Because I think is it possible that this ever gets called for the header?
I'm not sure, to be honest, but I think it's best to be safe than sorry.
So we'll check that the row, that the row is greater than or equal to 0 and less than the number of orders that we have. And so we can return nil here, return nil here. Okay, so at this point, now we have our order for that row. And now I want to create the row model, which is our order table row for that order. And we can return the row model instead. And I'm just sort of doing this as separate lines of code for clarity. Okay, so I need an else there.
And implementing this object value method is also going to help us if in the event we want to implement stuff like drag and drop, reordering, and all of that stuff. So it's good to have that implemented.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to do something super satisfying, and I want everybody to relish in this. I'm just going to select all this stuff and delete it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we mentioned in the past episode that code was ugly and it could be improved. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. So back in our storyboard, we still have some work to do now, but this work is sort of easier to do in storyboards in this case. So we have our table view cell, and it's going to return an object for each one of these cells and rows, or rather columns and rows. So each cell is going to get that. And so if we jump into the cell, and I'm sort of learning that this little control thing here, I'm going to highlight this for the stream. That little icon is that is the thing that we're going to bind to, right? That's the control. Is that correct? Did I lose you?
Yeah, we have the it's confusing because we're inside a table view. So there's this thing that's the table cell view, which is the table cell, and then there's the text field, which is the label, and then there's the text field cell, which is this little object that renders the text field and handles other stuff like formatting and things like that. So it's legacy stuff because AppKit has this concept of cells. So buttons are rendered as cells and text fields and checkboxes and that stuff. So you have to keep in mind that whenever you're using a text field or a button or something like that, you are using two different objects to do its job. You're using the control object that contains a cell that handles rendering of the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's confusing, but the more I see it, the more, I don't know, it's starting to wear on me, I guess. I don't fully understand it yet, but at least I know that there is this sort of separation. Okay, so now that I have this control selected, I'm gonna check the binding here to bind to the table cell view, and it has this object value already in it. So now we can just type object value.order number, and it's going to bind to that object we returned. So this one.
Yeah. So now each row has its object, and you're just binding to the specific property you want.
Okay, and the other thing I noticed is that you can click once and then click again to get to the control. And if you click a third time, you get to the cell.
Yeah.
So you know that's one way of getting straight to the object you're looking for. Object value dot status, and then this one is price. Okay, so another point that was brought up from our stream last time is that we were manually formatting the price into a currency string. And one thing we can do here is attach a formatter to this text field.
Yeah, and I mentioned it briefly that you can actually attach a formatter to a text field, and it's going to format its value automatically. And as you see in the outline, the formatter is actually part of the cell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is the text field, and not just text field, but we're using a text field here. It has not only a string value property, but it also has other properties like double value, for instance. And when, of course, the end representation of its data is a string because it's a text field. So what you can do is attach a formatter that's going to take a double value, for instance, that is set on the text field and is going to format it to a string. And that happens automatically.
Okay, so I've set this up to be a currency, and that's it? That's all I have to do?
Yeah, that's basically it. You could customize it, but the basic stuff is that.
Okay, and I probably should have done like an intermediary. Like we have no idea if it's still working because it looks exactly like it did before. But we just deleted a whole lot of code. And so, yeah, this is definitely something that cleans this up quite a bit. And if you're just like throwing a quick and dirty table together and you don't need anything custom, then I think that's pretty handy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, I think maybe that's a reason why the method we had before, the one we deleted that returns a view, that method is in the NS table view delegate protocol. It's not part
Oh,
of the
it's not
data
part of the data
source.
source. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
that does make sense now.
yes, that I think that's why they have this separation.
Okay, so I was thinking maybe we could move on to this new order screen, create a little bit more UI, and we can talk about what it takes to create a new order.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to collapse these to give myself some more room, and then I'm going to go to where I have this button. Now, this is kind of where, storyboard starts to break down for me. And for some reason, it doesn't even let me zoom out. I'm already getting lost,
Yeah, there's too much stuff.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that certainly possible to create like a storyboard outlet using the storyboard reference and then go to a different storyboard. Something we might refactor to later. But for now, I think what I want to do is create a separate window and try to move this out of the way.
And by the way, we are probably going to customize the window with a toolbar or something. But if you just want to show a simple view controller, even if it is in a new window with a segue, you don't necessarily have to create a window controller as well, because the segue mechanism is going to create one for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we're probably going to customize the window in some way. So in that case,
so for
we do
now,
need...
this window controller won't even have a custom class because we don't really need it yet.
Yeah.
But we do need one for our order UI.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk real quickly about what it takes to create a new order. You have two types of orders. There's caption orders and subtitle orders. We're really interested in caption orders, but we can submit both. Subtitles are more for like taking a movie and transcribing it into many languages, or translating into many languages, and then like in the player of a video, you'd have a picker for which language subtitle you want. The captions are more for closed captions in case you are either hard of hearing or are in an environment where you just want, like, it's loud or noisy, or you don't have access to your headphones or whatever, and you just want to see the subtitles. And those are more what I'm interested in. But they're two different API calls, and they take the formats are slightly different. So I think that what we would need is the what's it called, a pop-up button.
Yeah.
That has the two things in it. There's also that client ref string. So let me grab a couple of labels and a text field here. So this guy is the order type, and this guy is the client ref, which again is just like my own information that I need. So for in my case, I've been putting the episode number in there so that when I get the order back, I know which episode it's for.
Cool.
So for these items, let's see, this is the menu that I need to customize those things.
Yeah, so as you can see on the outline, you have your pop-up button, then you have a cell, and the cell has a menu.
Now, when you say the cell has a menu, like in UIKit, this would be a subview. So you have like views and layers, and so you can have subviews or sub layers, and in some case both. But since a cell is not a view, what is this? How does it have a menu?
Well, it actually has a menu property. So that's basically it. It's not inside the cell, let's say. It's just a property of the cell, and it knows when to make the menu show up.
Okay. So I think that these are the only two properties we really need as like top level information for an order. So what I'm going to do is similar to what we did last time, is throw those in a horizontal stack view, throw these in a horizontal stack view. I will take these two labels, the order type label and the client ref label, and I want to make their equal widths. And then I want to right align them.
And this is a very common UI pattern on the Mac.
Okay, so then I'm going to take both those stack views and then add those to another stack view like this, which seems to have destroyed my constraints.
Yeah, because they changed their parent view, so I think you lose those.
Okay, so I'll do that again.
Okay.
Okay, that's good enough. And then this thing for the placeholder, I'll just say optional for that. Now this outer stack view needs to have a place to live. And this is kind of where, when iOS, you have like one, especially on iPhone, you have like one screen size. So things sort of fit naturally. But when you have this big window and you have these like two fields, it's always kind of hard to figure out exactly where they should go.
At least it doesn't have a notch.
I guess. All right. So I'm just going to pin it to the view like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's good enough for now. Okay. So the next part of an order, the next part of an order is you can either add files to it, in which case you'll upload directly to rev.com. And we can do something like NSProgress to show the file upload, or you can provide a URL to a video that they can then grab. So they support YouTube URLs, Vimeo URLs. I think if you're using YouTube or Vimeo, you have to have previously granted them access to your account. In my case, I can generate a temporary URL to a video that exists on S3, and then they can fetch it from there. And that's the easiest because it doesn't, my videos are already on S3. I've already uploaded them. So essentially all I need to do is provide a URL, and then that's a separate endpoint. So it's like we're in the process of creating an order. We're going to create what are called order inputs. And so I might create one order that has 10 videos in it. And so that gets billed once and delivered all at once.
So each input is a separate API call?
Yeah. So basically we do multiple API calls to get all the inputs we need. And then the API returns to us like a string, like a location string, like a URN for that video on their system. And we have to reference that in the order that we submit.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so because there could be multiple, I was thinking that we would use a table view here.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then I can sort of set up some constraints there to keep the table view like that. This window, do we want these windows to be resizable?
Well, it wouldn't hurt, I guess.
So
but
if it's
also not
resizable,
necessary.
then should this thing have like a minimum height or width?
You can set, you can set a both actually, and then the window resizing is going to respect that. Or you can set a minimum size for the window itself, whichever you prefer.
Okay, so at the bottom here, so we have this scroll view. Here's what I want. I was thinking like examples of like plus buttons that control a list, and they're in many places. One of the ones I was looking at is in the network tab. There's this little bar at the bottom here.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to replicate that, and it turned out to not be like super obvious how to do this, because each one of these buttons they're like sharing a border. So, I'm not sure how much of this is like custom drawn versus just using like the gradient button. So this was one example I saw, which is sort of old school, and sort of a more modern approach. If we look in Xcode, there's a handful of cases like this one. I'm just trying to bring it up bigger for the stream, where you have just sort of like a a borderless plus button at the bottom of a list. And that also exists in the target picker here, where you have a plus and a minus.
They're probably using the same view even, because they're very similar.
Yeah. Okay, so originally I was trying to figure out how I could maybe put this in the table view and like provide like a footer. And I sort of ran into a dead end there. So how would you recommend sort of replicating that? Like putting a view on the table view itself is probably not what we're going for.
Well, you could actually put another view that's going to contain the button and add it to the same super view as the table view's scroll view, and then just use constraints to position it on top. And then you can set, if you want to, you can set content insets on the table view, but I don't think it's necessary if it's just one button.
Okay. Okay, so why would we do that? So it resizes with the table exactly?
Yeah,
Is that the point of doing it that way?
Yeah, you basically pin it to the bottom of the table view.
Okay, so here I'm going to be adding it to the scroll view.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And
this is an important
make
difference. On iOS, the child of the scroll view gets scrolled, right?
Yeah. But on the Mac, there's this thing called the document view, and it's what gets scrolled.
That's what this clip view is?
No, the clip view is the clip view. The table view would be the document view in this case.
Real quick in the chat, we're getting a question that what is that thing that I'm using to sort of highlight stuff? Last time we had some issues with people couldn't really see what was going on because I was pointing at buttons that are really tiny. This is Snipose, and done by Samuel Ford, friend of the show. And yes, as soon as he released this, I was like, I could totally use that.
Cool.
I use it more for presenting like at conferences and stuff than in Screencast, because usually I can like control scroll and stuff. But for this, it worked out well. And unfortunately, you can't see this on Skype.
Yeah, it doesn't work with Skype.
I'm not sure I understand the mechanics of why that is, but
yeah.
Okay, anyway, I want to be careful because as I'm dragging this around, it looks like it wants to try and add it to a subview of the table cells.
Yeah, so the trick I use when that happens is I use the resizing handles to kind of move it around. So
okay, so that won't ever reparent it.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. Good to know. Okay, so now that I put it here at the bottom, I'm not sure what that height is at the moment, but I can pin to the left and right. Wait.
Yeah, I think you're pinning to the super view itself. Maybe you could pin to the table view, the scroll view.
I did accidentally reparent it.
Yeah, but you can keep it there. I think you don't have to actually add it as a subview of the scroll view.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense. Okay, so at this point we could do leading and trailing constraints, and then
bottom as well.
Horizontal or vertical spacing.
Yeah, that works.
So if we were to add it to the scroll view, then if the table view had a lot of content and scrolled, this view would technically be above that content, right? It would be hovering above the scrollable area. Is that correct?
Yeah, it will still be above with the way we did it now. Because you added it.
Oh, because
to
it is. Yeah,
super
yeah.
view.
I guess you're right. It still is.
So
above.
It's on top. Yeah, and the outline view, it's the topmost view is at the bottom. So our custom view is below the scroll view when you look at the outline view.
Mm-hmm.
So that means it's going to be on top.
Right. Because it's like reverses the order or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so does that mean then for our table view, we should change the sizing to inset the bottom by the same amount as the height here, which is 25?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that real quick. So content insets bottom 25 to match.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. We're going to get a file name back and a URN. I may rename these because those are not too particularly interesting to the user of the app. But okay, so now for the custom view, if I pick, instead of gradient button, I'm just going to use the push button. I mean, all of these are NS buttons, right? So
yeah,
like,
they're
once
all
you
the same
drag
class,
it in there,
but you can customize it.
so now I forget which one I wanted here.
I love that they have a discouraged styles in there.
Yeah. Do you know which one I want if I don't want the border at all?
You can use gradient, but then you can uncheck bordered.
Got it. Okay, so then the title for this one, actually, there's going to be an image for it.
Yeah, we won't use the title, I guess. You can use NS add template.
Okay. We'll probably have to explain that. So these are just a bunch of built-in images, like system styles and stuff, right?
Yeah, so just like on iOS, you have standard system images. We do have those on the Mac as well. In fact, I think we have more of them, and they are all NS something. And when they end with template, it means they are template images that are going to adapt their rendering to the context that they're on.
Okay, so one thing I did just now, and it's really hard to see this, is that I did the center Y constraint and the leading constraint here, and so it shrink wraps to its content because the intrinsic content size is small. So in order, it's just like on iOS, do we need this to be bigger so that we can actually click on it?
Yeah,
like a little slightly bigger tap area. Is that? It's not quite as important, right? Because we can be more precise with the mouse, but I don't want to have to click in a 8 pixel wide area.
Yeah, I think we would benefit from having a bigger button.
Okay, so maybe 25 by 25.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
Cool.
So then we also would potentially have another one for. Oh goodness! I'm going to option
use the
drag.
outline.
There we go.
Yeah, I
Another
usually go for the outline view for these types of manipulations.
NS remove template. Check it out. Works.
Yeah.
Possible you want a stack view for this.
Maybe.
I think we do. And then here I will say leading top and bottom. There we go.
Cool.
Okay. This one should be disabled initially, but when you configure like initial values like that, there has to be a selection there. So I know that you can do like array controller. If we end up using array controller for that, we could bind to whether there is a selection. How else would you handle that to enable this button or disable it based on whether there's anything in the table?
Well, you can you can set it to disabled by default, and then we use an outlet with the view controller. Yeah, do it in code, and if you could do it in code in an abstract way, or you can do like a property on the view controller that is something like should remove button be enabled, and then you can bind to that. But
okay,
that's a matter of taste.
Okay, so I'll just manually set it to disabled for now. The other thing I know I'm going to need eventually is some sort of like progress indicator. I'm tempted to put it just here because we're going to need it like.
Maybe you can add it to the stack view.
Okay, so now
I think the stack view has to be centered.
There we go. Okay, and then this guy, we don't want to display it when it's stopped. And so the reason why I was thinking that is that my thinking for this is that you'll click the plus button, you'll get a little menu that says, do you want a file or do you want a URL for your input? And then we'll pop up a different view controller based on what you choose. So, cool. Okay, so when I was playing around with this, I was thinking, okay, I will add a menu up here, and this menu will have file, and it will have URL, right? And then I can create an outlet to that menu. Let's see, did I ever create I never did. Let's create a new group for new order, and I'll put it right below this one. We're going to add a new file for the view controller. This will be new order view controller. Import Cocoa. I was going to add an outlet for the menu. So this would be the add input menu.
Mm-hmm.
Does this happen to you all the time? I'm finding that I always get NS Responder.
Yeah, it happens sometimes, but I don't think you've set
yeah, that's true.
class yet, but it should work now. Oh no.
Okay, close it and reopen.
What you can do is option click. You can use the quick open dialog, and then you type the name of the view controller and you hold down option. So
yeah, it's probably better. I just get frustrated with these things because they should like it's just like little speed bumps here and there, and I feel like it doesn't work more than it does work, and so it just leads this kind of, I don't know, a lot of stumbling.
It's frustrating,
Which for somebody, I've been doing this for a super long time, and I keep thinking that maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe there's a different way, but usually when I talk to people, it's like, Xcode just does that. Okay, so we could potentially connect to these menu items directly to other view controllers, in which case it would create a segue to that view controller. Is that correct?
Yep.
Before I do that, I want to handle this button click, which is add input clicked. Is an outlet, not an outlet, an action.
I think you have to type that manually, unfortunately, because Xcode is being Xcode.
I'm going to try and build and think maybe that might help. Action, add input clicked. There we go. Yeah, I guess I just needed a build. Maybe now the automatic will work. Yep.
Oh, look at that.
Okay. So when add input clicked, I want to pop up this menu.
Yeah.
Is that a method on here? Is it present or something like that? Pop up.
Yeah, pop up.
So positioning NS menu item at point. So I think nil would be the first menu item at the point. I can say 0 in sender, right? Because sender is a button.
Yeah, and you'll have to cast it because the type is any.
So this would be, it's an NS button that got clicked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you not just say that the sender is an NS button here?
Yeah, you can. I think when you're creating the action, you have that option actually. But it comes by default as any, just like on iOS, and it's annoying.
One other thing I noticed when I was playing around with this is that you can't create an action that doesn't have a sender. On
Yeah,
on
you
iOS you
have
can,
to.
and I thought that was really odd.
Yeah, it's odd. I'm not sure why you can't, but you can't.
Okay.
You should probably, since this button is going to pop up a menu when clicked, you should probably set it to fire its action on mouse down instead of on mouse up, which is the default.
Is that over here somewhere?
Yeah, I think so. No, maybe you have to set that in code. Yeah, I think you have to do it in code, unfortunately.
Okay, I want to launch this and see if we're getting what we think we're getting.
I think you didn't hook up at that. You forgot to hook up the new order button.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I thought I did, but did not. Okay, so being careful to select this one, that one. Those 4 clicks for those counting. Okay, and this one could be, I don't think modal makes any sense here because I could have multiple orders going on. It would be no problem to have multiple windows going on. And maybe referencing an old order to make sure that I don't add the same file again or something like that.
And also figure, because modal is not only relevant to do I have only one, but it actually changes the way your app behaves because you can't do anything before you dismiss that window.
Yeah.
So the controllers themselves have a presentation option where you can set if it's single or multiple. So and it's multiple by default, so you can have multiple ones.
Okay. Okay, so let's go new order, click the plus, and this is where I initially started stumbling. These are grayed out because they have no actions associated with them. Is that my understanding of that seems correct, that there are no actions associated with that?
Yeah, they don't know what to do when you select them.
Okay, so if I grab another view controller.
This storyboard is getting interesting.
Yeah. You know, it wasn't that bad when I didn't have my resolution scaled. And I also don't know why I can't zoom out right now. Like I'm trying on the trackpad.
You know, that might be an Xcode 931 thing because I noticed that issue yesterday.
Yeah, I've noticed it on multiple people's machines where there are no zoom controls down here, and zooming with the trackpad doesn't work. There still is Windows Zoom here, but I'm not sure what.
Yeah, that's actually
doing.
the green button.
What do you mean? That's this one?
Yeah, that's the same action.
Okay, so this one is essentially just going to be have a text field. With a couple of buttons on it. Push button. This one will be cancel. And this one is add. Because one is cancel and one is add. I had to research this, but these buttons have these key equivalents, and if you hit enter there, it means that that's the default button for this like view controller.
Yeah,
and
it's
changes
the one
its
that's going
style to.
Yeah, remember in the old Coco days where they were blinking buttons. They blinked. And also, I think the cancel button, because you named it cancel, it automatically added the ask key equivalent. So that's cool.
Yeah, so
Time
right down
saver.
here, that's the escape symbol. And it also means that when I hit that, it will dismiss it by default.
Yeah, it's going to.
I don't have to do any of that.
Yeah, it's going to call the cancel button action. So I'm not sure if it's going to actually dismiss the view controller automatically.
I think it does, but I'm not
we can
positive
test that.
Okay, so I added this to stack view, and I will just pin this to the edges. I think I could probably do something like that, and then the spacing can be a bit smaller, I think. And is this the right order? Affirmative on the left or affirmative on the right?
I'd have to check the human interface guidelines.
Okay.
I'm not sure, to be honest, but
I probably won't know
works.
until I actually use it. But it's like you always know when it's wrong. And I really hate it when people do it incorrectly. But now that I'm sitting here doing it, I can't remember. So if somebody on the stream wants to go look that up for us, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to say
Check
the wrong thing.
Search for the human interface guidelines for macOS and tell us.
So it's just one of those things that you like when I'm on a Windows machine, I notice it, and it's frustrating because it makes you think every time. Anyway, okay, so we have this like dummy view controller that isn't doing anything right now, and on the URL, I just want to, I want to show this thing. Actually, I think I want to show it as a sheet. In which case,
that would be cool. Yeah, it makes sense.
Can I do that here, or do I have to do that in code?
I think you can select show, and then you can modify the storyboard segue. Interesting.
Okay, we'll do it in code.
I thought there was an option there.
So in this case, there's that presentation you were talking about. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll need to set the storyboard ID so I can actually create one. This will be add input URL view controller. And I'll copy that. And then go back over here and add an outlet for this guy. And this would be URL clicked. Not an outlet, an action. There's that type you were talking about that you could set. Okay.
Yeah, you can change the type.
Okay, so then here, in order to create that view controller, I need a reference to the storyboard, not UI storyboard, and a storyboard. Old habits die hard.
Yeah, I've done that so many times.
Let me do this like this. Normally I have helpers for this stuff to just make from storyboard, which assumes that the class name is the same as the identifier is the same as the class name, and then I use the class to make the storyboard. But in this case, we don't have one. I'll call it storyboard else return. This will be storyboard.instantiate view controller with identifier.
So I just fired up an empty project here because I was sure they had a sheet option, and there is, but I think maybe because you are using a menu, there's not a sheet option by default.
Interesting. Maybe this is just like not quite standard.
Yeah, I dragged from the view controller itself to another view controller, and then you have modal, popover, show, and sheet. And so you could do that if you wanted to, and just call perform segue manually.
Okay, so now I've got my URL clicked handler. I create the view controller and I call present view controller as sheet.
So Dmitry on the chat says that your buttons are in the wrong order.
Okay.
An action button which initiates the dialog's primary action should be furthest to the right.
Okay. Thanks so much for looking that up, because
Thanks, Dmitry.
I want to do the right thing. Okay.
That looks better.
It's definitely one of those things, like as soon as I start using it, I'd be like, oh, that's wrong.
Yeah.
All right. So now when I click plus, URL is enabled. Okay. So I have to pause here for a second because, oh, you're right. And it doesn't dismiss automatically.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. That's interesting. Okay, because when I tried this before, I tried wiring this up exactly like this. And these menu items were disabled. And so, I asked you, how do I set this up? Or, one of the things that it does to check is that the menu has a target and it has an action. And if those things are not set to a valid thing, then the menu items grayed out. And so that makes sense. Like when you go into these menu items, like some of these things are disabled because that action doesn't exist anywhere in the in the responder chain.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at the moment.
Yeah. And so it makes sense when you sort of think about it like that. In my case, I'd done it just like this. And now this is why I can't get out of here now.
Yeah, that's modal, so you'll have to kill the app.
Yeah. I guess I have to stop debugging.
It's a modal session, so you can't kill it. You can drag from the cancel button directly to the view controller, and I think it has a dismiss action built in.
Yeah, okay, cool. And that means escape will also do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I have no idea why this did not work earlier when I was sort of practicing this stuff.
Weird.
Okay, so...
Yeah, I remember you asked me, and I immediately thought that it must be the lack of a target and an action.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish I had a reason for that. Okay, I want to create a quick NSView controller for this because my goal for this is to let you type a URL here. I would like it to where it doesn't let you click add unless you have a valid URL, if possible. And then when you click add, I don't actually want the upload to happen here because I'm sort of assuming that this thing is going to be really dumb. And then the adding of the input would happen here, and we'll show the spinner there.
Yeah, that's good.
So a little sort of curveball in this is that if I click add, I don't want this to disappear right away because it's going to be uploading. And if that upload fails, rather not uploading, but posting, if that post fails or returns an error or whatever, I would like this still to be on the screen so you could try it again or correct a misspelling or whatever. And so what I'm thinking for that is that this guy will define a delegate protocol that the other view controller will implement.
Yeah, that sounds right. I like doing that. I think it makes sense for the thing that's presenting this view controller to control its presentation. So I would even go a step further and add a delegate for the cancellation thing. But since we have time constraints, we can leave that automatically.
Yeah, because you might want to do something else in the presenting view controller.
Yeah, so I think it makes perfect sense for this to be a delegation. You could use callbacks if you prefer, but I think there's nothing wrong with delegation. Some people seem to think that it's somehow an old thing. Delegate there, yeah. People think that the delegation is an old pattern or
I don't get that sense at all. It's super useful. I think that blocks are useful for smaller things, but this formalizes it and lets you put a place for documentation to live and all that stuff. Okay, so there's one other curveball that I want to support, and that is that while this is going on, we need to disable this entire UI. So I was thinking of just binding these things to the same field. So on our view controller here, we'd have a is form enabled property, which is true by default. And then maybe a func enable form true, and then disable form here. And the reason why I would do this here is because if you imagine the flow, we're going to click a button from within here. It's going to notify the delegate that we selected that URL, and the delegate is going to be doing some upload, and we want to disable the form while that's happening and re-enable it or dismiss the view controller depending on whether it succeeded or failed. And so keeping those things separate, where this thing is still dumb, only knows about a proper format of a URL and whether there's whether its controls are enabled.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so for me to do that, I need to pass like the add input view controller itself in the delegate, so that the
it's usually good practice to send the,
because otherwise we
caller.
don't have a reference to it. We in our view controller here, we just created this thing, and then we will need to change the type here.
Yeah.
To that, and then set the delegate.
And if you were doing a segue, you'd use prepare for segue to do that.
Yeah, good call. Okay, I also am using NS object protocol here so that I can do weak. Add input view controller delegate like that. And here we can set the delegate to self.
And then you have to implement it.
All right, so now I have this did select URL. Okay, so what I was thinking here is that we would say, okay, controller.disable form, then we'll do the upload or API call. And then if it's successful, we will dismiss view controller like that. Okay.
Yeah. And you have to actually bind the controls to the enabled property, right? That's the value you want.
Oh, good call.
The
enabled.
Yeah.
Bind to is form enabled. Can you select multiple? No.
Unfortunately not. So my friend Benjamin, he's asking if we use just weak with any object. And yeah, I think we could. In fact, when I define my delegate protocols, I usually just specify that they have to be class. So the implementer has to be a class.
Okay, yeah. I was sort of crossing the streams there. Like this, right?
No, it's
or here.
in place of,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good call.
So then you can do weak, yeah.
Because obviously you can do this in Swift.
Yeah, and the implementer doesn't have to be an NS object then.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so for, just to drive that point home, if we don't have that, it will complain right here because this thing could be a struct.
Yeah. So Benjamin is saying that class is deprecated and that it should be any object.
Any object.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Interesting.
Today
I guess because the implementer has to implement the any object protocol, so it makes sense. I always thought that class was weird there.
Yeah. Good to know.
So thanks, Benjamin, for the tip.
Okay, so we have bound the form enabled thing. Now I want to bind the. I'm not sure what the best way to do that. If we had like a dynamic var for the URL value, which is a string, then we could bind the text field's value to this, and then maybe have a different one that checks the validity of the URL.
Yeah, you could have a separate property for whether the URL is valid or not.
So that will start out as false, in which case I can get rid of that.
Christoph is saying that the any object change is Swift 4.1, so that's why it's so new to us.
Okay. Okay, so if we have these two things, then I need to know when this one was set in order to change this one, right? So could I do the did set, or is this going to interfere with bindings?
I'm not sure. Let's try it.
Okay, so here maybe we would say NSURL with string URL value and check
And
to see
it's
if that's
just,
not nil.
yeah, and it's just URL. You don't need the ENS in there.
Oh, true.
Old habits.
Mm-hmm.
And just a caveat here, using the URL string constructor to validate a URL is not really a good idea because it accepts
It will
many
accept a whole
things.
lot of things that are not valid.
Yeah. So
Well,
you should
because it could
probably,
be a file URL also. So
yeah,
maybe
there's that.
a regular expression or something. Just just to prevent people from pasting in an invalid string and wasting the time to post to the server just to say that you had a typo or this was a blank string or whatever.
By the way, does it have to be a file URL? Because then you can use the isFile URL property.
Well, no, I would say if we're going to do that, we're going to do this and bring up an NSOpen panel.
It doesn't have to be a file URL. Yeah, you're right.
Right. Okay, so now the value here is going to be bound to the view controller's URL value property. And then the add button, we have enabled already bound to that, but it also needs to be bound to the is URL valid.
And it's funny that they have enabled and enabled 2.
So now that we get enabled 3.
So I guess that's doing an AND. That's going to AND the 2 different values. Yeah.
In that, if it wasn't doing an AND and we needed an OR, then we would need our own third property that we just bind to that one. Okay, let's try this and see if this works. No.
Yay!
I didn't set the type.
Yeah, that's important.
Okay, so I can type stuff, but it doesn't look like a URL yet. And if I type this, var.mp4, this is where I want that live binding thing.
Yeah.
So if I check the binding to continuously updates values, I think that'll do the trick.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and as you can see, it will accept any string, basically.
That's funny. Okay. Okay, before I move on to this, past this, I'm kind of surprised this worked. And the old way of doing that is there's a class func called keypaths
affecting value for keys.
Keypath.
I think yeah.
And this returns an NS set, I believe. Or maybe in Swift, I think it's a string set.
And you have to receive a parameter.
I think that it's for keypath now. This has changed a bunch of times because this is like a really old sort of awkward thing to represent in Swift. I think this is what it looks like. And if you implement this, then the idea is that this lets you set up dependent keys. So you could say the value for keypath, I can say if the keypath is URL valid, because basically it's going to call this one for every keypath in your UI, I think. And then you would return a new set that says, whenever URL value is changed, I want you to recheck this thing. In which case you could do computed properties and have those things sort of reevaluate themselves. And then here you would always want to return super, I I think. Super key paths for values affecting value. Oh, yeah, that's it. Key paths for values affecting value for key.
Wow. That's a mouthful.
For key. Which means your key path is now for key. That's
I just pasted the link to the documentation about this on the chat.
Okay.
But it's not actually a link because the chat wouldn't allow me to add an URL there.
That's funny. I guess it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I think that this is unnecessary for our case because we're already using this did set thing.
Yeah, so it's cool that we can combine the old KVO with the new Swift did set thing.
Yeah, I had a brief project where I did some Ember development, and I was new to Ember, and that was one thing that I found that was pretty nice in the Ember way. When you're setting up bindings to things, you could set up bindings to functions and other things from your UI, and setting up dependent properties. It was kind of an awkward syntax, but once you wrap your mind around the fact that any of these fields could trigger a change in this one property, and so you just sort of model that so that it will check the UI.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, so when it gets set, that's the... Okay, so this is going to be an interesting case. So we're going to have an IB action for the add button clicked.
Yep.
Which will be this NS button. And then here
you forgot func.
Oh, yeah. We'll set our delegate to say did select URL. Actually, I can do guard let URL equals URL value flat map to url.init. Else return, because we don't have a URL to pass back. And then we can return self here. And that pretty much keeps our controller done. I can talk about this real quick. This why didn't that work? That should work.
I think it's because URL value is not optional.
It's not optional.
Yeah.
So in that case, do we want a compact map, or we just want to map it? I don't even need to do that.
In that case,
sorry.
You can, in that case, you can just call the initialize. But if it were an optional, then you'd have to use that so you don't have an optional.
Okay, so let's just drive that point home. So if x is nil, then we don't even want to try to convert it. And so you could do x.flatmap url.init, and it will only apply this function if x is non-nil. And so I use this a lot to sort of apply the value in an optional to another function, or just skip it entirely.
Yeah, just so you don't have to do multiple guardlets or something.
Yep. Okay, so this guy, I got to wire this up to the UI. This one.
And of course, it's the wrong
view controller. Automatic.
Yay, it worked.
Okay, so now the add button is clicked. So now when I click return on this, I want the same thing to happen, right?
Yeah, and it's going to happen automatically because the add button.
Because
it should.
In a text field, when you hit return, it like commits the value change. So like when we were dealing with the preferences, in order for me to like make sure that field saved, I either had to tab out of it or hit return inside the field.
Maybe you should change the text field's send action on property.
Let me just double check real quick. Oh, does work. Sweet.
I think the things only
this
work
thing is
when
very forgiving. This is very forgiving of the URL.
Yeah, I think it only fails if you add some very special character that it doesn't.
Spaces.
Yeah, basically
Okay,
that's it.
yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I definitely need a better validation mechanism for that.
Yeah, so homework for those watching, write up a simple Swift method to validate URLs correctly.
Okay. So that does call the view controller, then it dismisses the form. And now here I just need to call that API and create a separate function here called submit URL input.
Yeah, that's a pattern I like to use. I don't like to implement very complex functionality directly in delegate methods. I like to extract to a separate method.
This also means I need to do revkit here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this rev client, and it takes these things. I actually have a helper here that I can drag in real quick.
And maybe you'd want this client to be injected on this view controller if you're doing a
Yeah, it's
dependency
probably a better
injection
thing
kind of thing.
than to continue doing this. But we already have this rev credentials that returns the current thing. So I just made an extension that initializes the client with those credentials.
Cool.
Which means I need to import revkit here. It was kind of funny. I actually got an email from rev.com. And there was like a survey for like which of their libraries have you used? And I was like, oh, I've used the Ruby one, and I'm also writing my own in Swift.
Cool.
Let's see. Rev credentials doesn't currently have environment, but it will in a second.
The magic of television.
How about just this? Bam. Okay, so now this will keep our environment as well. So if the environment pref is there, then it'll set the appropriate enum for the client to use. Okay, cool. Now back over here, we can initialize this with credentials and use .current.
It's an optional.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't even be here if we didn't have credentials. So it's probably better, like you were saying, to inject it and just have the whole flow assume that there is credentials. But that said, it's different than iOS that you could be anywhere and change them, right? Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, no. That's so annoying. Okay, well, we'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
Okay, so then this client, we have upload input from URL, and it has these optional things here. So the first thing is the URL that we're going to be uploading. The file name, we could specify the file name, or we can pass nil for it to get the file name from the URL. And then same thing for content type. If it's like an MP4 file, it will make a safe assumption on the server side. But if you're just passing in like an arbitrary URL with no extension on the end, then you won't have a good file name and you won't have a good content type either. Actually, the content type, if the server is returning a content type for that resource, then it will work. So in my case, I'm going to be using S3, and the S3 URL will return video/MP4 for a MP4 file. So I can pass nil for both of these things. And cool. That means I can just leave them off. And in the end, I get a results back from that. And I can switch on the results. And in the case of success, I get a location. The location is just a string. So that's the URN to to that media in their system. And then in the case of failed, we get an error, and we can present error, right? Like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should use weak self in that case.
Because the view controller might be dismissed before this calls back.
Yeah, no, I think we can use unowned because we we have the sheet showing up, so you can't close.
I can't get out of it. Okay, so I don't think that's absolutely required here because I'm not hanging on to the client.
Oh yeah.
But it's probably a good pattern to get into.
Yeah, I always prefer to use it when I'm not sure because who knows.
Okay, so we mentioned that we only want to dismiss that controller if it was successful, otherwise enable it. So I kind of want to have some sort of little callback or completion that is an escaping closure that just returns whether it was successful or not.
Yeah.
And that way I can say call the completion with true here and call it with false here.
And
then we can
again,
call submit URL.
All of the RevKit callbacks already happen on the main queue, right?
Yes.
Cool.
So this submit URL input, if it was successful, then I want to call dismiss the view controller. And again, we can do the unknown self thing. Otherwise, an error would have been presented, but I want to tell the controller to re-enable the form.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Submit. Oh, we also need to show the spinner. So I'm going to have an outlet to that. And then this location, we need to do something with that location. I was thinking maybe just a quick model object for these new orders. So this would be like an order input table row, just like we did for the order table row.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to show on that table view we have.
So I'm just going to copy this pattern here. And this guy is going to have the URN to the file and the file name. And those are the only two things we will have. So
and that URN is what you're going to send when you actually submit the order, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So URN, file name. Oh my goodness. I'm like incapable of typing URN without error. Self.file name equals file name. And this guy is order input table row. So now here, this guy is going to add, we need to have an array of those. So we'll have a private var input items, which will be an order input table row. And then we can have a did set on that, which reloads the table.
Yeah.
Dot reload data. That means I need to have an outlet to the table view. And while I'm at it, I'll add the outlet for the progress indicator.
So now it's the fighting with the automatic thing again.
Yeah. Okay, table view. This is one benefit of doing it like this, that it will only select a table view, so it sort of picks it quickly.
You can't accidentally hook up the wrong thing.
Right. Which happens a lot if I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'll grab a constraint. I do that a lot. All right. So now that we have those two things, the other thing we're going to want while I'm in here is to have an extension on new order view controller that makes it an NS table view data source so that I can return the order items or input items dot count here, and then the object value for table column. For now, I'll just return nil, but that will let me set the table view delegate to this. Sorry, data source.
Yeah.
Okay. Back at this is another thing just while I'm here, because I imagine other people have the same thing where you're like hooking up outlets and actions and stuff like that. And at that point, I'm like, okay, time for code. And there's no way in Xcode to take the right-hand side of an assistant editor and just go straight to that. Yeah, I have to hit Command Enter to close that, and then either use a keyboard to type it again or do this. I always found that to be really, really awkward.
This is going to sound silly, but it's one of the reasons why I don't use storyboards.
Because the back and forth is awkward?
Yeah, it's a pain to be switching context all the time, so I don't use them.
Okay, so we'll use that. And then for the file name, we may run into an issue in the future where because we didn't specify a file name here, then we don't have any way of carrying over the file name that you requested. So we're going to have to sort of match the behavior of the server and just use url.lastPath component for the file name. Later on, if we decide to provide a file name, we're going to have a way for this to carry over into the UI.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can use input items.append input item. And singular. I need a self there. So Christops is saying he uses one tab specific for storyboards, so no need to switch back and forth. I agree with that, except for the way tabs work in Xcode is completely incompatible with my brain. I'm really used to just the way other apps work, where you have your panes on the right and left-hand side that you need, like your file browser or whatever, and then everything else inside of here is tabbed. And the way that Xcode wants to just reorient the entire interface inside of a tab, I find myself not wanting to use tabs basically ever.
And it consumes a lot of vertical space as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm on a 27-inch iMac, so it's not quite a concern for me, but on a laptop, it's certainly worth mentioning. The other thing I would do, if I have these two tabs set up like that, like I have these great intentions of doing that, but then in practice, I would accidentally go to the code in the storyboard tab, and now I've got two tabs with the same content, and it just, I don't know, it always felt awkward. I have recently tried this approach that was recommended to me about keeping a playground in a separate tab and using a behavior configured to jump straight to the playground with a keystroke. And it worked okay until I did the same thing. I was in the playground, and then I clicked somewhere to open up a new file, and there goes that pattern. So I don't know. I think Xcode is still pretty awkward in this regard. Like it's flexible enough for people to create their own workflows, but there's no way to like enforce that really.
Yeah, but it's a nice tip for those who can use the tabs on Xcode.
Okay, so before we submit this input, I want to tell the progress indicator to start animating. And then after we're done, to stop animating.
Did you hook up the cells on the table view to the values?
I did not.
There's always that last little thing that's missing.
So it's probably going to prompt me for these again. Oh, there's two things wrong. I didn't return this either.
Yeah. So it would probably work, but the table view would be empty. And by the way, I mentioned the table view would be empty, but it would probably have the rows in there, but they would be empty. So it's a little different from what's common on iOS, which is table view cells are never empty. There's not a concept of empty table view rows, but you do have that on the Mac. You can have empty table view rows.
All right, so this one we called file name, and this one we called URN.
You can't type URN.
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah. This is annoying. If somebody knows a way to, aside from not using the KeyChain for development, because I click always allow, but then, and it has to do it twice because there's two keys.
Yeah, that's very annoying.
It's also, my password's like 25 characters long or something. So it's not something I can type really fast. Okay. So if I type something invalid, bam. And this is that present error that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And I was intentional in putting the API error in the NS error so that I could do this. So,
and again, like we mentioned on the previous episode, the present error is standard for responders. And if you want, you can override the present error method and use your own presentation. So you can, instead of showing an alert, you could show just a text field, or you could shake the window or something.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I think this one is extract HTTP location. This one. So, sorry, not that one. It's extract API error. So the errors come back in like a common format, which is not logged here. But so basically, if we do get an error, then I try to decode the response as JSON. And if I can get one, then I can get an error response back, which looks like this. And out of that error response, I can build my own NS error that uses the message as its failure reason.
Cool.
And so that's what I ended up doing so that I could sort of bubble up the API error. It's the best, information that I have to show the user. In some cases, this would be inappropriate to show the user, like a raw API error reason. But in this case, could not retrieve media is a useful message. And so maybe what I could do is have my own lookup based on the error code of the server and, tweak the message a bit.
Yeah, and even though it's not a very pretty error, it's very clear that the reason is that it was not found.
Yep.
So if the person is entering an URL and they see not found, they are probably going to know what happened.
Okay, so I'm going to go over here to my NSScreencast folder, and I have a generate episode URL, and I will generate a temporary URL that'll be valid for, I think I did it for like an hour or two. Anyway, so
if you can copy the
then
URL,
you can watch it
for free.
So an interesting thing about the way S3 works is these videos are private, but I'm going to temporarily grant access because I have the signing key to generate a secure URL that the URL itself is code signed, if you will. There's a signature based on the content of this URL, and that includes the date and the expiration date. So on the server, if you get a valid request and it's expired, it just won't work. And if you try to tweak these numbers, then the URL signature verification will fail. And so this is a secure way of just generating a temporary access to a resource. And so if I pass that in and do it, they should be able to grab that and give me back a rev.com URN for that resource. And it worked. Check that out.
Yay.
It's quite long.
Yeah.
The fact that it's there is not that interesting or important that we display it, right? Just that we have a file in the list, and that later on when we click submit, which I assume maybe will go in the window controller, or maybe a button down here, I don't know, but it would be able to use those inputs that we created.
Nice.
So I think the last thing I want to do is hook up this minus button.
Yeah, let's do it.
So you were saying probably the easiest way to do this is with an outlet for that particular button, so we can enable it and disable it accordingly. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that makes sense. So the deal is that we need to enable or disable it based on the existence of a selection on the table view. Yeah.
And so maybe we didn't need an outlet here, but we could have bound to a property.
Yeah, I think there's probably a way to do it with bindings.
You mean just with bindings? Or because we would have to have a binding for whether or not this table had a selection or not.
Yeah,
I think
I think it has a selection indexes.
Okay, so if we bind this to our controller,
yeah, you can do dynamic var selection indexes, and I think it's an index set.
Indexes or indices?
Good question.
I think indices is more like grammatically correct. NS, it's just an NS index set like that, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Can I do that? No.
I think you can do an optional there.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's appropriate anyway.
Yeah, and maybe you can do a did set, and then you set the whether it's I think you'll have to unwrap it, unfortunately.
Well, we get a count out of that. So we can, let me do this.
That thing again.
Too small. Selection indices.count or 0. Greater than 0.
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so now I just need to bind to this property in the table view. That guy?
Yep.
And then we also need to know when we clicked that.
Yeah.
I'll move it down later. This will be an action. Remove input. Remove selected input.
And I guess that's also an API call, right?
No. It's a good question. I don't really know if if they even have. I didn't.
You can just omit it from the final call. I guess those inputs expire.
So you're sending them inputs, which I think they expire after a while. Where's the?
Yeah, if you don't use them for anything, I bet they expire.
You can post inputs. That's it. It's the only endpoint here. And so I assume that there's probably something in here that says it'll like expire after a while, but
Yeah, so basically what you're going to do is remove the input from our collection and just not include it when you actually submit the order.
Right. Okay, so we've set that. So now I just need to be able to get this selected object and remove it, which is here. I want to move this down. Okay, so we already have the selection indices. Is selection, we can only select one item by default, right? I would have to have told the table to select that it can select multiple things. Actually, it doesn't.
Yeah.
You could, even if we had the ability, we should for each one, right?
Yeah, you can enumerate. I'm not sure if they have for each.
Okay, so yeah, if one interesting thing is that I will be deleting items from the table like in a loop, which is probably not the best approach for this. We could,
I think the table
reset
view
it with a filtered index.
Yeah.
So something like input items equals input items dot filter, and then whether that sorry, I need to do enumerated so I get the index also.
Yeah.
Dot filter, and this gives me the index and the input item in. And so now that way we'll only set it one time. And this is going to return
yeah, I think filter will not work there. I think you should use maybe a map or a flat map, because you're filtering on an enumerated thing and you're assigning it to just an array.
So the filter
is probably returning an array of tuples, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could map after this is done.
Yeah.
Okay, so this would return that the index is included in this selection. Right?
Yeah, you have to remove the ones that are in the selection.
And now we've got an int.
You return $0.1, I guess. Oh, element. It actually has a name. Well, you can do the one-liner thing. You can remove the return and yeah.
It's a little hairy, but
yeah, it's not very pretty, very readable.
All right, let's make sure it works. Oh.
Yeah, I think for the next edition, we should do some, I don't know, have it use the user defaults for debug builds or something.
Yeah, which would not be hard to do.
Yeah.
I sincerely hope their production API is faster.
Yeah,
because this is pretty slow.
Yeah,
and it sort of makes it where it's less useful if it's going to take this long every time, because you can't continue. There's nothing really you can do.
Yeah. Can you add multiple inputs with a single call? Does it have to be necessarily one for each one?
I don't think so.
Well, I think we should grab some coffee or something.
This is the return value. it's kind of, this isn't, it's trying to describe 3 different things. Send us an XML or JSON entity like this. Yeah, this is not the return value. So this is what we're posting basically. So a single one. And then if we end up doing the multi-part thing, then we would end up, well, there's 2 ways to upload it. There's upload it directly, setting this as the body of the post and the content type header, and use content disposition for file name, or a multi-part form request, which would be more like a web form way of posting, which is similar. But I think we would end up doing this one.
Yeah.
Okay, finished.
Yay.
Okay, and this is not enabled. Now it is enabled, and now I can remove it.
Yay.
That's awesome. I'm still questioning about this menu thing, but I'll leave it alone for now because it is working. Cool. Well, before we wrap up, are there any more questions on the stream?
Yeah, so we have some people watching. Maybe they have some questions. So people, send your questions. I guess there's a delay.
Yeah, there is. I've been enjoying this Mac app stuff. Like every time I have a few minutes, I have to decide like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to read, or am I going to play a game, or am I going to play guitar, or, and so a lot of that time has been spent poking around trying to figure out how I want to build this Mac app.
Yeah, once you go past the initial struggles, I think it becomes kind of fun, and it's different. So on my day job, I do iOS, and I have lots of Mac things on the side, and I went a while without doing any Mac stuff, and recently I started doing some stuff for my WWDC app because WWDC is closed, so we have to get our updates done.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun for me coming back to the Mac and doing the Mac stuff again because I don't know, I really like it. I started doing the Mac stuff, so I still have kind of nostalgic feeling about it.
Okay, so Smilebot said, what are the best resources for learning this? I was going to pick up my invisible book again, but since you can't see it with my green screen, I'll show it on Amazon. It was...
the invisible book is a book that Ben has that's green, so it doesn't show up.
It's Cocoa Programming for Mac OS X. And I think this 5th edition, it's, it's still a couple years old, but the whole point of this stuff is it is really old, and it hasn't changed a whole lot. And so there's still a whole lot of value you would learn by doing this. Also, Aaron Hilligus has just a knack for teaching. He's a fantastic teacher. The one I have is this one. It's from 2008, and that's why I can't show it to you because it's greenish in color. But it's only $4. So
wow,
yeah, that's cheap. Or you can find one for 25 cents.
Yeah,
I'm not sure about any of the other books. I'm sure there are some good books. This is the only one that I have read, and I read this primarily to teach me Objective-C so that I could do iOS. And so there was a whole lot of stuff that I was like, yeah, that's Mac stuff, like undo manager and bindings and whatever. So I skipped a lot of that stuff. But most of the stuff is still relevant. You just have to, in addition to going over this, like this one right here is say 3 years old. You would really just, there's like storyboards and, there's like scene kit and other stuff, but auto layout was there back then. And, core data was still there. Just core data has changed a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'll leave a link. It's not a link again. It's a semi-link, I guess. Christian, he has 3 books on Mac app development. I read the Make Money Outside the Mac App Store from him when I was going to release an app outside the Mac App Store. But he also has a book called Exploring Mac App Development Strategies. And then he has a Creating Multi-Process Mac Applications. So really advanced topic. And I've only read the
Okay.
Make Money Outside the Mac App Store